Well, Warren Peters with brain signals again. So, as we get older, we kind of all know that there's something about the memory that isn't quite what it used to be. So, we're going to kind of launch into a little bit of a discussion about is this just the normal aging process, or is it actually dementia? That's a very confusing area to not only us, the people, but also to providers as they're getting not sure, how do I make this diagnosis? And they go, oh, well, we better get a PET scan, or we better get some kind of scan of your brain and see if you have some plaque. But much of this memory issue actually becomes way, way earlier. And so today we're going to kind of look through a little bit some of these pre places that our brain has to deal with. So let's just kind of start with the idea that there's a big difference between an older brain and actually a diagnosis of dementia. So let's just start there. So when we think about everything about getting older, there's an energy issue. As you notice, it takes a little bit longer to get up from a chair, or it gets a little bit longer to get moving. And that energy issue is actually happening in our brains long, long, long before we have some of these tangles you hear about, plaques that you hear about. But energy is really the issue. So let's think about that energy a little bit as it relates to what's really happening here. How are these two things working together? So, as you remember from your biology and when you were in high school and so on, the brain has little connections. They call them synapses. So, these are places where little synaptic dendrites kind of connect and they click and they go off and they send messages all over our body, all over our mind, and so on. So those synaptic activity is actually electrical. It actually takes energy. And that's where the brain seems to be having a little bit of a challenge, because the brain uniquely is only 2% of our body weight, but it uses 20% of the energy. Get that? So the brain tissue is only 2% of our body weight, but it is soaking up 20% of all the energy used in the entire body. All our muscles, our stomach, our liver, everything else needs energy, but the brain takes 20%. That's a pretty big hit when you think about it. So sometimes we kind of call it low metabolism. Hypometabolism is kind of the scientific word. But that low metabolism we see in the brain tissue isn't firing exactly at the same level. And this is actually seen early on. So obviously we want to begin to understand not only the energy for my muscles, but my energy for the brain. And we've talked about this a little before, or you probably read about it, where sleep is really important. And this is where we have almost kind of like a lymph flow inside of our brain. And we actually call this the glymphatic system. So this is where the brain actually begins to clean itself, just like the lymph system does in the rest of the body. And that's why sleeping is very, very important. You've probably noticed as you get older, sometimes old memories are there longer and easier to recall than something that's brand new, because these old memories have kind of a pathway. It really doesn't take much energy because the pathway, let's just call it well paved. It's kind of it just goes. But when something new comes up, a new pathway has to be created, and that's where that takes energy. So where is this energy coming from? And so we think about it, and we think about, you remember we talked about mitochondria. So these little cells within the cells, these little action areas within the cell, the mitochondria really, really are important. And now, this is a little side piece, and you may or may not be interested in this, but the DNA of these little mitochondria are actually different than us. So they actually came from someplace else, but decided to join us a long, long time ago because they're actually different. They're actually come from a bacteria of all things. So anyway, that's just a little sidebar there. So when this energy system begins to decline, that may be maybe 5-10 years before we come to the next step. And this is where the Alzheimer's, so let's say Alzheimer's disease, and maybe it's like we almost describe it as genetics cocks the gun, environment pulls the trigger. So this actually becomes very real in this issue because now we've already had this decrease in energy, but we begin to have these other activities, these inflammatory activities that begin to develop that then can actually lay down plaque. Now, plaque is actually protective initially, but over time, the plaque becomes even more inflammatory. So that creates some more issues for us. So we have this dynamic. We have this early decrease in energy, and then we have the results of inflammation, which brings in the plaque and the tangles and that sort of thing. So the signals of just ordinary getting older, we start seeing that there may be we're kind of forgetting, even with little clues and cues, that we're kind of forgetting where that is. And maybe even, as we've discussed before, some emotional issues begin to show up. And this is where we begin to see that something's going on here greater for you than just getting older. This is where we kind of cross the line from just the normal process, which not everybody does, because many people, they die with their brains just exactly the same when they were 25. Well, not quite, but somewhat close to that. So that's where we want to kind of begin to look at how do we interrupt some of these processes. Well, first of all, lifestyle is critical. We've talked about sleep. But one of the major factors that keeps this energy going in our brain and in our mitochondria is actually physical exercise every day. I just got on my bicycle on my 83rd birthday just so I could say that I was getting exercise to help my brain on my 83rd birthday. So those are the things that we really start looking at. What can we do to actually help the mitochondria provide more energy for the brain? Then we also start looking at what are some of the therapies that are now out there for us. Now, if we go way down the pathway and we already have plaques in our brain, we already have tangles in our brain, how can we begin to treat or prevent this type of activity? So with that in mind, we want to kind of look at where the different areas are that contribute to Alzheimer's disease. One of these activities inside our brain that's getting faulty in the energy system is actually we become insulin resistant. Now, you've heard that word as it relates to diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And inside the brain, that same activity is going on, which obviously without the insulin, then we also have the metabolic effect of not having enough fuel for the brain cells to function. So there's that energy issue there again. So in this whole area, we begin to look at just observationally, as more and more people were using incretins to treat diabetes or to treat obesity. So the incretins family, maybe you've heard of Ozempic or Wegovy. Zepbound, Mounjaro. These are all incretins. And we have a big pipeline of new incretins that are coming in. Just was at a meeting last week where we're looking at maybe 5 or 6 new incretins that are in phase 1, phase 2 trials before FDA approval. So the incretins are getting a lot of attention right now. But to our great disappointment, Novo Nordisk did a huge study with semaglutide, that's Wegovy. It's a GLP-1. It's just one molecule, one antagonist, GLP-1. And this actually created a heartbreaker. This was a huge study over 2 years, 40 countries, 50 languages, multi-million dollars. And the endpoints was to see if people already who had mild cognitive impairment or early Alzheimer's, if we could actually reverse clinically their loss of memory, their loss of change of their emotional life, and so on. And also we were looking at some of the markers, like just in blood markers like p-tau 217. Everybody was hoping to see that this change would happen over 2 years. Sadly, it just was revealed at the conference I was at just last week in San Diego. It's called the CTAD. So this is clinical trials, Alzheimer's disease. So these are all the researchers from around the world coming together. And we heard the very sad story that clinically there was no improvement. Even worse, we didn't see the change in the markers. So there's a lot of data in here. And so everybody's kind of looking and saying, well, what's the problem? Well, here's one of the thoughts that we have is that we do have another incretin that has a GLP-1, but it also has a GIP. We call it GIP. And fortunately, we have a lot more GIP receptors in our brain than we have GLP-1 receptors. So one of the ideas is that possibly the dual agonist, and this would be like Mounjaro and Zepbound, maybe, and we have a triple coming into the pipeline that will have possibly even a bigger impact. But we really, in animal studies, in just looking at populations of people that have been on these medications, about a 30% decrease in dementia diagnosis over 3, 4, 5 years. So these are what we call observational studies. It doesn't prove anything, but it raises a hypothesis. Could these actually be useful in this situation? So really, this study is not a failure. It actually shows us that we need to look up a bit broader in this whole idea. So again, it comes back to just some of the basic lifestyle kinds of things we can do. We can use our exercise to increase our mitochondria energy. We might also look at some of the ketogenic diets, because our brain not only runs on sugar, it actually runs even a little bit better on ketones. So ketones are what our muscles make when we don't have enough glucose. And so then the body switches over to ketones, which are also useful in the brain. And then obviously getting enough sleep is a big deal. So you maybe also have heard about some of the newer medications. We're called the monoclonal antibodies. And these are actually targeting the specific plaques. Now, 3, 5, 6 years ago, maybe even longer, we were actually targeting people with significant dementia, Alzheimer's disease. But then we started seeing that we could actually watch the plaque being removed, but people clinically weren't that much better. But now we're beginning to realize that we need to move further and further back, more and more like prevention. And many of us remember, if we're old enough, we remember that people used to have heart attacks, and we just go, wow, that's terrible that you have a heart attack. I'm sure sorry. But then we started working backwards, 50 years, 55 years ago, we started working back. What's causing the heart attack? And now it's just routine. People say, oh, well, stop smoking. Or they say, oh, let's check your cholesterol. Because if your cholesterol is really high, you're more likely to have a heart attack. So we're in that same phase now with Alzheimer's disease, where we're starting to move backwards. We're working more and more towards prevention. We call it pre-AD. And this means that we have possibly a blood marker like p-tau217 and A-beta ratio, and maybe even a gene like APOE4. Those are three markers that indicate a propensity to Alzheimer's long, maybe 10 years as much before we actually have symptoms. So as we work back, now we begin to say, oh, there's things that I can do in the meantime. So the other thing that's happening in this monoclonal antibody world is the brain has what we call a blood-brain barrier, which is very vital to keep toxins out of our brain. But at the same time, it also blocks therapies. So a number of pharmaceuticals companies now have what they call a shuttle. So the shuttle actually takes the little monoclonal and takes it across the blood-brain barrier more quickly, and therefore the effect on the plaque is sooner, and we're actually seeing fewer side effects. That's the big deal. We call them ARIAs. These are side effects that nobody wants because they're moving that plaque back. And so there's hope down the road. And again, the pipeline is very rich now with a lot of pharmaceutical companies wanting to use the shuttle to help their monoclonal antibody get across the blood-brain barrier. So we're probably going to see some interesting results there. And of course, don't want to forget some of the nutraceuticals. And I'm working on a project right now with pomegranate. We'll talk more about this at a later time, where it actually produces something called urolithin A. And we have to have the right gut bugs to make that happen. But that'll be another time we could discuss that. But for right now, it's very important for us to differentiate normal aging from the disease of Alzheimer's disease. So for brain signals, there's the word for this moment, and we'll talk to you again.
Outstanding.